Which is better, the Samsung Galaxy A07 or the Samsung Galaxy A17 5G? Well, in this video, we're going to find out. What's going on, everyone? This is Kevin here, coming at you with my comparison of the Galaxy A07 versus the Galaxy A17 5G. Now, obviously, the A17 5G is the better phone of the two, but the reason why I want to make this comparison is that if you're considering going for the A07, then at least you'll know a benchmark against the A17, so you can get a better idea of what you're actually missing out on. Because it is likely that when it comes to certain features, the gap between this device and this device isn't as much as it might seem. Now, one of the biggest differences between the Samsung Galaxy A07 versus the Samsung Galaxy A17 5G, of course, is that there is no 5G compatibility with the A07. So with this phone, you are limited to just 4G LTE, and that might not be a big deal based on the region that you're in. I know for me personally, I do prefer to have a phone that does have 5G, and 5G is certainly where things are heading, if not kind of the present dominant technology. And when it comes to price, that is going to be different based on the region that you're in, as well as official availability for either of these two phones, but clearly the A07 is the more affordable phone of the two. In fact, this is Samsung's most affordable, lowest end smartphone, so you really can't go too much lower than this device. Now, something I noticed that's especially interesting is that despite the A07 being the cheaper phone of the two, these two devices are exactly the same size, and they have the same exact size display. So with both phones, we are getting 6.7-inch display panels. However, with the A17 5G, we are getting Gorilla Glass Victus, whereas I don't actually know the type of glass that we're getting here with the A07. So I would assume that based on that, the glass on the A17 5G is a lot more durable in comparison. So if you are someone that knows that you're prone to breaking the screen on your phone, then the A17 5G probably will make a lot more sense over the A07. Now, there are many other differences as well when it comes to the displays. Now, the display on the A17 5G is a bit brighter compared to the A07, but in addition to that, they are using different display technologies. So we're getting PLS LCD with the A07 versus Super AMOLED with the A17 5G. And then both phones do actually have 90Hz refresh rates, so that is actually very impressive, especially for the A07 that it is getting that. But since the display on this phone is LCD, you're not getting nearly as good of viewing angles compared to the A17 5G, since this AMOLED display panel certainly is ideal when it comes to that. And definitely when it comes to colors and vibrancy and all of that as well, the A17 5G is the better phone of the two. In fact, if you didn't know how expensive the A17 5G is, which on its own is actually still a very affordable smartphone, and especially compared to other options offered by Samsung, you'd actually think this is actually a decently high-end phone, because this display really does look good. It looks really excellent. Now, the display on the A07 is 720p compared to 1080p with the A17 5G, so that's another department where the A17 5G is better. But actually, despite the A07 being 720p, things actually do look very crisp and clear here, so you really wouldn't even know at first glance that it is 720. Now, along with that, we're getting a PPI of 262 with the A07 compared to a PPI of 385 with the A17 5G, so certainly a lot better here. And then with the A07, we're getting a 20:9 aspect ratio, so a very narrow but tall form factor. And then we are getting a similar form factor with the A17 5G, but it is 19.5:9. So I would say when it comes to that, it is very close with these two devices. Now I remember that it really wasn't too long ago that a lot of phones were actually 16:9 or 9:16, and I certainly do prefer this taller form factor instead, especially considering how people tend to use their smartphones nowadays. With having your full social media feed in your smartphone, it's definitely a lot better having these taller displays because technically you can see more of a single feed without having to scroll as much. And also when it comes to websites, you can see more of a single website without having to scroll as much. And despite the displays being so large on these phones, they are both still very easy to hold in the hand. Now, when it comes to using the phone with just one hand, it is very difficult to reach all portions of the operating system here, but if you watch my tips and tricks videos that I did on both of these phones, you'll see that there is actually a dedicated one-handed mode to assist with that. And then finally, with these devices, with the A07, we're getting an 83.6% screen-to-body ratio compared to a better 86% screen-to-body ratio with the A17 5G. Now, in general, both of these phones do have a similar form factor up front here. They both have the water drop notch up top, which I'm not a huge fan of, and then both phones do have a thicker bottom bezel. And you can see side by side, they're both nearly identical. Now this form factor has been repeated many times in Samsung's A series and with other companies as well, and in many ways, these phones aren't very distinguishable from previous generations of either phone. I suppose though that if you're just looking for an affordable budget phone, you don't really care necessarily too much about the overall design of the phone, just as long as it is at least pretty practical, which in this situation that is the case. Now in these notches up top, we're getting an 8 megapixel front-facing camera with the A07 versus a better 13 megapixel front-facing camera with the A17 5G. And then with the A07, we're getting 64 gigabytes of storage, and then with the A17 5G, we're getting double that at 128. And then both phones do come with microSD card expansion, which is certainly very awesome. So if you do want to offload photos and videos and maybe your music and other media onto that SD card, then you can free up some of that internal space. But I do feel that in 2025, 128 gigabytes is pretty much the minimum. Now take a look and see how much storage you're using on your current device, and who knows, maybe the A07 will be fine for you, but I know at least for me, I definitely need at least 128. Now neither of these two devices have wireless charging, which is a bit disappointing, but both phones do have fingerprint sensors on the power button. So we'll try this first with the A07, and it's very fast and responsive. And now we'll give it a try with the A17 5G, and that works really well too. We'll try that again, and you can see it is very fast. So that implementation is totally fine. I know nowadays all the higher end phones do have an in-display fingerprint sensor, but it's certainly not inconvenient having it be on the power button. I'm at least glad that with the A07 we're even getting a fingerprint sensor at all, because I do remember previous generations of this phone, at least a few generations back, you didn't even get that. So you'd have to put in your PIN code every single time you wanted to access your phone, which is certainly a bit annoying. Now taking a look at the cameras on these two phones, that is certainly where one of the biggest differences is. Now you'll probably notice at first glance, we are getting one less camera with the A07, but in addition to that, the secondary camera is only a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, which you're still getting portrait mode with the A17 5G, but we don't need that dedicated camera. Now both phones do have 50 megapixel main cameras, but then with the A17 5G, we're also getting a 5 megapixel ultra wide angle camera and a 2 megapixel macro camera for close-up images. So certainly, you're getting a lot more camera abilities with the A17 5G, so when it comes to that, this phone is a lot more versatile. So if you are someone who doesn't take a lot of images with your smartphone, then I suppose the setup here with the A07 is totally fine, but I do wish that we did at least get other features like the ultra wide with the A07, but I suppose that is a reason why you might want to consider getting the A17 5G instead. But fortunately, the main camera on both phones is very good, but it isn't the exact same camera, that's for sure. So you are going to be getting better camera quality all throughout with the A17 5G in comparison. You could even see through the viewfinder here that the colors are totally different. Of course, once the phone actually does some processing, the final result will be even different from that. But even at first glance, you can kind of tell the difference here. And then the ultra wide camera is right there at 0.5. And then with that, you can fit a lot more content into a single frame here, which is certainly very helpful. Now, when it comes to RAM, processor, and performance, that's also very different with both phones. Now, the A07 comes with 4 gigabytes of RAM, but with the A17 5G, based on the version of the phone that you do get, it is going to come with either 4, 6, or 8 gigabytes of RAM. And this specific version of the phone does actually have 8 gigabytes, which is pretty impressive. And then the processors are different. Of course, with the A07, you're not getting 5G support, but also with this phone, we're getting the MediaTek Helio G99 processor versus the Samsung Exynos 1330 with the A17 5G. Now, I did run a benchmark test using Geekbench 6 on both phones, and I'll show you the scores in that test right now. But basically, you can see the scores right here, and this is actually pretty interesting. So with the A07, I got a higher score at 727 and a multi-core score of 1910 compared to the A17 5G, where I got a lower score here at 672 and a multi-core score of 1741. So I'm not really sure what's going on with these scores. I will say from my own experience, it does seem like the A17 is the faster phone of the two. I guess when it comes to benchmarks, that's just not the case. But from my experience of using both phones, the A17 5G starts up faster, the phone runs a lot smoother, it feels higher end in comparison. So I'm not really sure why the benchmark test showed that result, but I do still feel like the A17 5G is the faster phone of the two. But I just want to still show you the benchmark test in case you are curious about that. And then with both of these phones, video recording is limited at 1080p for both the front and rear cameras. And then with both phones, we're getting 5,000 milliamp hour internal batteries along with 25 watt fast charging. So that is very impressive that the charging is that fast, considering that these are budget devices. And then with both phones, we are getting Android 15 out of the box, along with Samsung's One UI 7, which also means both phones will be getting up to 6 years of major Android software updates, which is especially impressive considering that these are budget devices. So if you do plan on keeping either of them for a long time, then just know that they will be supported and updated by Samsung into the long term. And then with the A07, there is no NFC, so there's no tap to pay or Samsung Pay, whereas with the A17 5G, we are at least getting that. And then with the A17 5G, another difference is that with the cameras on this device, we are actually getting optical image stabilization, also known as OIS. So what's going to happen with OIS is that when you're taking a photo, it's going to be a lot less blurry or not blurry at all, and your videos are going to be a lot smoother. So that's certainly a nice feature, and that's actually a feature this phone gained from the previous generation. Now both phones are made completely out of plastic, as you can imagine, but both phones do look very different on the back. I really love this kind of wavy green look that we're getting here with the A07. This is very unique, and I just think it looks really cool. But at the same time, with the A17 5G, we're getting this matte finish, and it also has kind of a cool bit of a gradient look to it as well, based on the angle that you're looking at it with. So I actually think both phones look super stylish, and I just love this blue color that we're getting with the A17 5G. Now on the right side, both phones have the volume up and down and power button, which doubles as the fingerprint sensor. Up top, both phones have the noise-canceling microphone. On the left side of both phones, we have the slot for the microSD card and SIM card. Then on the bottom of both phones, we have the USB-C port, we have the speaker, microphone, but you can see with the A07, we are getting a headphone jack, whereas we're not getting that here with the A17 5G. So it is really cool that this phone does have a headphone jack. I know there's some people who really want a device with that feature, so at least you'll probably be very happy to see that we are getting that here with the A07. And then on the back of the two phones, we're getting Samsung branding, the camera module, flash, and that's pretty much it. But I hope you enjoyed my comparison of the Samsung Galaxy A07 versus the Samsung Galaxy A17 5G. If you liked the video, definitely give it a thumbs up, but this is Kevin here, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care and have a great rest of your day.